What is a working forest conservation easement? Among forest landowners, there is both much interest in and confusion about conservation easements and their benefits and restrictions. Over the next several minutes, we'll clarify what working forest conservation easements are and how they may benefit the landowner and forest. Forest is the dominant land use in North Carolina, covering 58% of the state, or almost 18 million acres. Not only do these forests provide clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, and outdoor recreation, they also provide the raw material for the state's largest manufacturing industry, forest products. The total annual economic impact of the forest products industry in North Carolina is over 200,000 jobs and more than $28 billion annually. One remarkable figure is that close to 90% of our forest land is owned by hundreds of thousands of private landowners. And the decisions landowners make about their land are important to us all. The best way to learn about working forest conservation easements is to talk with landowners, land trust staff, and land use attorneys and get advice on how to begin a working forest conservation easement. Parker Lumpkin, a landowner in North Carolina, talks with me about his experiences and concerns with working forest conservation easements. When you hear the term conservation easement, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Restrictions.
I think that's probably fair to say for a lot of landowners. Most of the easements that are offered today are what most landowners call forever easements. They're perpetual and tied to the land. How does that strike you? Is that a plus, a minus?
That's a negative thing for me. And the reason is I'm not one of these cradle to grave guys. And I don't want to put things on my children and grandchildren. You know, what's good for Parker doesn't necessarily mean it's best for my children. And you do one of these permanent things and everything, and you're putting a set of handcuffs on them. So that would generally be a negative.
What are, say, the top 5 issues, questions you might have?
If they're dealing with wetlands to protect water sources, I want to know if I'll be able to duck hunt it, and I'd like to know if I can still do my timber operations in it, and then I'd like to. I don't even know about the development side. We're not in the development business, so I don't even know what development questions to ask.
Well, would you give up development rights in some of your upland areas?
Maybe. Nobody's talked to me about that. Depending on what the money is. I really don't know how all this stuff works. I just need more information that I have not spent the time going to get that information.
Parker's concerns, like many other landowners, are focused on giving up rights to their land, the ability to hunt, fish, and use the land the way they want to. And they want the ability to continue their timber operations and enjoy the profits from their investments in forest management. I made a quick inquiry online, and it became clear that I needed to talk with a land trust representative and get a better idea of what goes into a working forest conservation easement from the land trust perspective. Well, when it comes to a land trust and a landowner, what does a landowner need to know about, or need to know first before approaching a land trust about a conservation easement?
What we encourage anyone who comes to us inquiring about putting an easement on their land is this is a great time to sit down with all the stakeholders in a property, all family members, and just do some long-term planning. Think through where they want to see their land go.
We've talked to a lot of landowners in our membership and across the state about easements, and one of the things that we hear repeatedly is that forever's a long time. And landowners can, I think, sometimes rightfully be concerned about tying the hands of their heirs forever. Are term easements a viable option, and is anybody really offering term easements?
At present, we do not have terms. All ours are in perpetuity. Just because of the complexity of these agreements and all the players that have to come on board, we have just found it is in our best interest to have these in perpetuity.
What's your view of the working forest easement when it comes to a landowner maybe maintaining actually a timber management program and continuing a harvesting program?
Well, where we are here in the Sandhills is a very unique ecosystem in that managing this ecosystem is as important as preserving it. It is an ecosystem that must be managed mainly through fire, thinning, whatever, to maintain the health of that forest. So this is a perfect area for folks who engage in forestry to look at a conservation easement, a working forest easement, as an option of how to preserve some of their heritage, at the same time continuing a revenue stream that will be long-term for generations to come.
When a landowner signs an easement, we know their costs, and that landowners, even if they donate, there's a financial obligation that they incur. What kind of obligation are they looking at?
It depends. Say, for example, a family wants to donate a working forest easement. Then part of that donation of that land will be an endowment that we keep to pay for the administrative cost of monitoring that tract of land. Now, if it was a purchase, then there's usually the funding in the purchase to set up that endowment. We, by our mission, try to protect lands that do have a conservation value. So we go out and first establish that that is there, and then we help the landowner come up with the language that will go into the conservation easement, the forest management plan, finding a surveyor who will come out and help them navigate what sections to put in, what sections not to put in. So there's just a whole lot of different steps that must happen before we reach that final document. What I always tell folks, that you're not committed to anything until the very end of this process. At any point, if you find that this is not a fit for you, you can decline to move forward.
Jesse gave me a much clearer perspective on how a land trust operates. One point he stressed was that the landowner involvement in a conservation easement was voluntary, and that the landowner could back out of the process at any time before signing the legal documents. I asked about term easements, or easements that lasted a fixed number of years. Jesse pointed out that most land trusts do not offer such easements because of costs and the fact that there are currently no tax benefits, either state or federal, for term easements. Although most land trusts don't offer term easements, there is work going on by others looking at this option. The North Carolina Agricultural Development and Farmland Preservation Trust Fund supports some types of term easements, and many of the state and federal cost share programs are, in reality, term easements that require the landowner to maintain the cost shared practice for a number of years. Although not widely available today, such easements could be more available in the future. I know that there are many questions that have to be answered. Who pays for it? What are the tax benefits? Can I still manage and receive income from timber? And so on. I clearly needed to talk with an experienced land use attorney.
Marsh, thanks for taking the time to meet with us.
Well, come on in.
Thanks.
We've talked to a landowner, has a lot of land, and has been under some pressure on the development side. And he's talked to some people about easements, but he's got some serious concerns about how much control he wants to give away on his land. He's worried about whether or not an easement gives the people, the government, more rights than he might have. What do you tell a landowner with those type of concerns?
Not every landowner is going to want to use a conservation easement, because a conservation easement basically removes some of the development rights, which, if those development rights were used to their full extent, would severely damage or completely remove the conservation values from the property. And there are a lot of property owners who want to develop their land into a shopping center or a housing development. And for those owners, a conservation easement doesn't work at all. But for other owners, family landowners who have tracts of timber that they like to not only harvest timber from, but take their family and friends out to hunt or fish on that land, those tracts of land are absolutely ideal for a conservation easement, because the development rights that get removed from a piece of property with a conservation easement have a value. And that value is deductible from the donor's taxes, income taxes. And in some cases, the donor of the conservation easement even gets a tax credit. For a property owner or a forest owner who really never intends to develop the forest, but would like to get some of the development value out of it, a conservation easement allows that owner to extract the development value without developing the property.
You have to have somebody interested in purchasing those values first. So aren't there some limitations for landowners?
There are some limitations. There are a lot of different ways that a landowner can put a conservation easement on a piece of land that landowner has. One way, a landowner can donate a conservation easement. Another way, in certain cases, a land trust or a government entity that also holds conservation easements might be willing to pay the landowner for a conservation easement. So sometimes a conservation easement gets purchased, sometimes it gets donated, and the third way a landowner can put a conservation easement on his or her property is with a bargain sale. And a bargain sale is in between a donation and an outright purchase. In a bargain sale, a landowner sells the conservation easement for less than its fair market value and receives a tax deduction for the amount of bargain in that sale. So those are the three ways that a landowner can set to putting a conservation easement on his or her land.
Even with a donation, there has to be a land trust, an entity that's willing and capable of holding that land or holding the easement on that property, correct?
That's absolutely right. In North Carolina, there are about 24 land trusts that are scattered all over the state. And then there's an umbrella organization called the Conservation Trust for North Carolina, which is based in Raleigh.
When it comes to easements, they can sell a conservation easement to a land trust. They also have a donation option, and their costs involved both in even carrying out that transaction.
Yes.
But aren't there longer term costs that are associated with, for an entity to hold an easement, aren't there longer term costs that landowners also have to sort of factor into their decisions?
That's absolutely right. A land trust, when it receives a conservation easement, it commits itself to visit that property at least once a year to make sure that the restrictions of the easement are being obeyed. So the land trust will need an endowment to make sure that the land trust can do that on into the future. And if there's not a government entity that has a program set up to subsidize this donation to make it more affordable for the landowner, then the landowner will have to pay that himself or herself. Most of the land trusts with which I've worked are flexible about this, so that if the landowner wants to pay it over a period of time, the land trust will let that happen. Will facilitate that. If the land trust, if the landowner wants to pay for it with appreciated securities, suppose instead of cash out of his bank account, a landowner might want to donate 100 shares of a certain kind of stock that is worth the amount of the endowment required. Well, the land trust will work with the landowner to make that happen. The benefit of that is that instead of the landowner selling that stock and having to pay that capital gains tax and then donating part of what's left to the land trust, if the landowner just donates the stock to the land trust or some other kind of appreciated security, then the donor gets to deduct the full fair market value of that donation without paying capital gains taxes. I've seen other landowners make an arrangement with the land trust where the next timber sale after the donation, a portion of that goes to endow that conservation easement that was donated. So there are a lot of innovative ways available for a landowner to fund that endowment, but it needs to be funded somehow or another. Stepping back a couple of questions ago, you mentioned the landowner's concern about losing control. Mm-hmm. There are different ways to lose control. You can sign away development rights and maybe allow too much control in the landowner's opinion. Another way of losing control is by having to sell the property when the next generation comes into it at estate tax time. So with a conservation easement, you can donate some development rights now and get a tax deduction for them and reduce the value of the property when it comes time to pay estate taxes. Or you can just hold on to it and not donate any kind of conservation protection, and that property will have full fair market value when estate tax time comes around. So some forest owners could be, their descendants, their heirs, could be forced to sell the property in order to pay the taxes, and then they've lost all control.
After talking with Marsh, I had a much better understanding of working forest conservation easements. If your forest land has conservation value important to a land trust or other organization authorized to accept easements, such as water quality, special habitat, scenic importance, or other similar values, and you as a landowner want to keep your forest land in forest, a working forest conservation easement isn't such a bad idea or investment. A point Marsh made that I hadn't thought about was that eventually we will have to pay estate taxes on our property, and that alone could tie the hands of our heirs, who could also lose control of the property. If there is no intention of developing the land and the desire is to keep it as a working forest, then why not get the tax benefit from a conservation easement? Next, I think it's important to talk with a landowner who has a working forest conservation easement and discover firsthand how the process went.
Alan, Rhonda, good morning.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
It's a pleasure. Welcome. Come on.
Come inside.
Thank you.
How did you get started in a working forest easement?
We found that a neighbor of ours had done it, and we, of course, have always been concerned about development of farm properties for non-farm uses. So upon investigation of our neighbor's efforts and our efforts, we looked at this opportunity and decided that this was the right thing for us at this time.
When you actually got into this and began the process, did you find a lot of surprises along the way?
Of course, there were many questions that were asked that we didn't really know the answers to, finding the corners of old property lines, dealing with various information packets that we had to put together. It was quite comprehensive, and it was there was many questions that we didn't know the answers to that we do now.
So the big thing you wanted to protect here was really the current uses of your property. You really wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be developed into a non-farm or non-forest use.
That's correct. And by virtue of the plan that we have in place, we also wanted to ensure that we were good stewards of the land and doing what all we could do to get the maximum benefit from where we live.
Oftentimes people describe property rights as a bundle of sticks, that individual rights, and when you donate an easement or even sell one, it usually involves giving up some of those rights. What rights did you give up in your easement?
I think what we gave up really was just development rights, not being able to build any structures. That sort of thing is what we gave up.
And in doing that, we wanted to ensure that past our lifetime and for perpetuity into the future, that no one else could do it too, because we see it happening. And even though we understand people have to have a place to live, we also have to have open green spaces, mature forests, all of these things that are necessary. So we wanted to pretty much ensure that past our lifetime to the next generation.
Many landowners, particularly forest landowners, as they learn about easements and begin to get into it, certainly have concerns about the impact it's going to have on their timber management program. Is that something that you were worried about or have seen in your easement?
Hasn't affected it at all.
If anything, it's allowed us to develop guidelines and management practices through a forestry plan and things like that that would allow us to do a better job, and maybe even better job than what we were doing before, because we have access to more information. And I would say it allows us to do a better job.
It does, but as far as day-to-day operations, that hasn't changed at all.
Going back to the timber management program, under the agreement in the easement, are there any restrictions on your timber program?
Not really. We've got planned harvesting, planned planting, planned replanting, control burns. We'll still harvest pine straw. We'll have areas where we're perpetuating the continued planting and growth of longleaf pines. We're having areas where there's hardwoods. Just the whole plan. It seems like it's just exactly what we needed to do at the time, and will allow us in perpetuity to continue to replenish the forest, so that longleaf pine trees, once they reach maturity, then they can be harvested and we plant new, and part of the natural forest cycle.
So this really, you see this as almost a benefit in terms of protecting your property rights on your property.
Quite so.
Oh, it is definitely a benefit.
Definitely a benefit.
Yes.
It's been a pleasurable experience.
It has.
And we met very nice people in the process whom
Every person who has been involved with this has been,
Been
helpful,
very
and,
helpful.
and kind, and
Worked
want
well
to do
with
what's
us.
best for our farm.
yes.
I started this journey talking with Parker Lumpkin, and I want to follow up with him on his farm and report to him about what I've discovered over the past couple of weeks. I want to see if I was able to find answers to his concerns about considering a working forest conservation easement.
Hello there, Bobby.
Afternoon, Parker.
How you doing, buddy?
Fine, good to see
So
you.
glad you could come over here on a pretty day.
Fish biting?
I don't know, it's better than working.
Well, you know I like my own gear.
Well, bring it on. I'm gonna outfish you anyway.
Well, that's not even the real reason we came, but it's always a
No,
nice
it's
sideline.
not. No, it's not. We need to fish down by these rocks too. He'll let us off.
Looks like a good place.
We're gonna find out. Tell me what you've learned, Slocum. You've been halfway around the state, haven't you?
I've covered a lot of ground, talked to a lot of people. It's been pretty interesting. The real driving force here is that, you know, as our state continues to urbanize, there are a lot of landowners who want to do something to try to protect their investment, protect their land. They like it in forests and don't particularly want to see it converted to another use. And so conservation easements, I've found, are a pretty legitimate tool for landowners, and they're certainly some worthwhile benefits, but they're not free.
But how about somebody like me, where you've got children who are interested in keeping it in forest land and would probably do that at my demise? So, I mean, why would I need one if I have that kind of commitment from them?
Well, there are a couple of things that may make it worthwhile for you to look at. One is that through a conservation easement, it can allow you to actually extract the value of development without developing your property.
You mean some sucker will pay for that?
And it may be valuable to them to place an easement on it, pay you for essentially the development value, and allow you to continue to use the land as you're using it now.
Well, they'll let me grow timber and harvest timber because that's what we do.
Well, and that's something else that I've learned is that easements can be, and usually are, very flexible and can be dictated in many ways by the landowner and what you want. And the nice thing about it is that there are not many
restrictions on the landowner. Now that can certainly vary, but what I've learned is that as a landowner, you've got a lot of control over how these things are written and applied. Because there can be, you know, if you find that somebody doesn't necessarily have the money to pay you for an easement, but you're still interested in it, there are significant tax benefits for you. And that was something we learned talking with the Hogans. And they donated an easement, and they did it exclusively for the tax benefits.
You know, Slugum, there's got to be some catch here. I mean, there's got to be some cost to it or something. I mean, it's not like anybody banging down my door trying to give me money or something.
Land trusts require and have to have what they call an endowment, which is money that the landowner puts up that allows them to monitor the easements, to carry out the terms, to do the things that they need to do every year to make sure that the easement is in place.
Does the endowment, is it set up with the money from the payment, or do the landowner have to come up with the money first?
The landowner typically will come up with the money or make arrangements to provide the money, and again, there's a lot of flexibility in how that can be done. You could set it up where a future timber sale could provide the endowment.
Well, how big's the endowment got to be?
Varies by how big the easement is, varies by the land trust. They do have costs. Something else you can do, which is sort of an interesting bit of flexibility I learned, and probably particularly applicable to you, is you can actually donate stock to a land trust to pay for this endowment. You avoid paying the capital gains on it, and it can also avoid those out-of-pocket costs in terms of you having to put up cash.
How long have you been working on this thing? How'd you learn all this stuff?
Well, when we first talked, you raised a lot of questions that I think a lot of landowners have, and it got me thinking. And so I started doing a little research on it. And,
Sounds like you've done a lot.
Well,
research this. Where the heck are the fish? There he is. Now you're just showing off, Slocum.
Well, what we did find was, you know, I think that while a lot of forest landowners, you know, they're both interested, and while they have a lot of concerns, we found out that a lot of those concerns are, you know, easily addressed and maybe not as serious as they may think.
Well,
and so there's no question that a conservation easement is a viable option for some landowners, but I think the big thing we always want to get across, it's not for everybody. After talking with forest landowners, land trusts, and attorneys, I've learned a lot about working forest conservation easements. To begin with, it is clearly a useful tool, but not something that fits with or works for every landowner. Perhaps the two most important points I learned were that it's a purely voluntary agreement between a landowner and a qualified land trust, government agency, or other nonprofit organization authorized to accept easements. But it only works for lands that have conservation values important to the accepting organization and landowners who have no intention to develop their lands. It's also a way to ensure that your lands will be used and maintained in the manner that you, the landowner, intended for generations to come. And while an easement does require a landowner to give up, donate, or sell certain rights on the land, it's up to the landowner to make these decisions along with the accepting organization. It is generally a very flexible arrangement that allows the landowner to continue to make most decisions about the management of his property. It's also clear that establishing a conservation easement is a complex legal transaction that requires a great deal of information, preparation, and the involvement of experts. The process takes time and, in most cases, money. Interest in conservation easements as a natural resource conservation strategy has quickly grown over the past decade. Funding has grown as well through all levels of government, foundations, and private donors to promote this strategy, largely through local land trusts, government agencies, as well as soil and water conservation districts. As North Carolina continues to urbanize, conservation easements will likely become an even more important tool in maintaining our working forest and farmlands. For more information, contact the Forest Education and Conservation Foundation.